Okay, so we're getting very close to June now, and June, of course, is Pride Month. And I completely understand why many within the LGBTQIA community, why there is a certain skepticism regarding the commercialisation of Pride. And I certainly agree that Pride is something that shouldn't be commercialised in the way that it has become. In fact, one of the first Pride marches I attended, it was actually a march. It was people walking through London. And at the end point, you would go to a park. In this case, it was Brockwell Park in Brixton, and there would be a massive sound stage. You would have all of the musical artists that you'd probably recognise and groups and things like that. And there was a lot to do. There were stalls, there were promotions, but most importantly, it was free. When you got to the park, of course, you had the opportunity to make a donation. Many people, including me, we did. Whacked a fiver in there. Doesn't sound like much today, but back then it was probably equivalent to a tenner. And you got on with it and you felt a sense of inclusion. And for me, coming from a place in the southeast that wasn't particularly significant, didn't have any much representation of the community. There weren't any gay venues or anything. You had to go to London for all of that. It gave me a sense of wow. As a teenager, this isn't just about me. There are large numbers of people, and of course, these days that sounds quite ridiculous because we've got to a point with inclusion, and you just think, yeah, those were the days. And now Pride, of course, I've been part of floats and things for companies, and I've seen how it goes. You have companies like Sony who have huge balloons that are in rainbow colours, but long gone are the days where a lot of companies would give things away to the community. I wouldn't it have been great if Sony had given away game vouchers or something like that to those within the community, but I didn't see any of that happening. I certainly don't think that going to a supermarket and buying a rainbow coloured sandwich is somehow demonstrating an inclusive view. Because in many instances there, any money that goes to an LGBTQIA charity is in the pennies, and that's at most. And you just sit there and you think, okay, the message has to be about inclusion. And I'm not selfish. It shouldn't just be for the LGBTQIA community. The whole thing about inclusion is, it doesn't matter what minority group you come from or anything like that we should all be represented safely in society where we can be ourselves, be open, and not be under fear of discrimination or attack. And I think that yes, progress has been huge with the LGBT community in the Western world, but I'd prefer more focus on countries where rights are appalling. Now we all know of the atrocities that go on in Iran in particular. I've highlighted that. It's very, very disturbing. And you've got countries like Russia and you've got China where there is active oppression and people are assaulted just for being themselves or being seen in public to be themselves. And everybody has a private life, but I don't believe you should have to hide your identity to your residence. We should be in a situation where being out in the workplace is absolutely, it's fine. Nobody looks at it with any great discrimination or anything like that. I guess I've worked in a couple of very progressive workspaces because that's never been a problem that I've had. Largely, the environments I've worked in, health and social care tend to be quite liberal and quite open and, very much are about, inclusion, particularly in mental health, because as we know, a lot of people with enduring mental health tend to feel excluded from society, and that needs to be sorted out, and it's going to take a very long time. So, whether Pride should be a month, my personal view is I prefer a long weekend as it once was because it's concentrated. It doesn't feel like, it means the public who perhaps maybe haven't had contact with the community in any great numbers can observe something, can interact, feel part of it, and it doesn't feel like it's a constant thing. And I know there are LGBTQIA people who are beginning to despise Pride because of commercialization, because of ideas that you're either with the movement or you're outside of it. I don't believe in that. Everybody, has a right to participate in what they want and, not participate in it, and no judgment should be made. But there are still areas for learning. I prefer, like I did back in the 90s, where, you had a proper march, where you had the opportunity to listen to people's experiences and understand why they're there. The last Pride event that I attended, was on behalf of House Proud, which is a network of different housing associations promoting accommodation for LGBT homeless people in particular. And there was a lady there. She was, very advanced in years, in her 80s, and she showed me photographs of the first few Pride marches, and she told me stories, and I just thought, wow, how different it is. But she gave me a perspective that I hadn't ever had before. And, I was really grateful for those people. And it's extremely important that people have the opportunity to go back in time where our society was different, where, people saw gay people as diseased or, terrible things like that. You need to go through history and have a look at where, if you have a problem with it today, you need to look at where it came from and why it is what it is. LGBT History Month. I mean, again, the commercialization of that. If you go to a supermarket, I'm not going to name any for obvious reasons, but there are a number of supermarkets that will, put a big little advertisement poster, that says LGBT History Month. But you go in there are no LGBT history books to buy. And if you were to ask a member of staff, what does LGBT History Month mean? And, they wouldn't be able to tell you because they don't know. To them, it's just something that goes up in the window. And that's sad. But if you want to know about LGBT history, there are a lot of places that you can go to. I'm not just thinking the internet. You've got to search out the books, Harvey Milk, people like that. You've got to make an effort. There are a number of bookshops which, you want to go into and have a look around. And LGBT libraries, particularly in Surrey, there are quite a few that during LGBT History Month they will put out a lot of material or make it available. The same with other minority groups as well, and that's absolutely right, because we do need to. Inclusion is about understanding people and then the value that they have. And for me, I think June the 1st is a good opportunity to do something on YouTube, whether that's, put a hashtag, inclusion matters or people matters, love is love, whatever it happens to be. You don't have to use a pride flag, but the message has to be about inclusion. Everybody does matter. Everybody matters. And that's it. That's a good one to use, although I know it's associated with other charities as well. But it's up to you how you display a message of inclusion. But I'd like to see people do it, to take, more than 5 minutes to, have a little look at LGBT history on YouTube, watch a couple of bits and pieces, good quality stuff. There's Channel 4 stuff, there's BBC stuff. I mean, Channel 4 has historically always been a broadcaster that's never been afraid to show LGBT focused content. They're very well known for it, and that was very apparent in the 90s, and it was very helpful to people like me out in the sticks, where we felt quite isolated and things like that. So I'd like to see that. I mean, I'm not saying you have to. I'm not saying if you don't, you're not inclusive. But if you value or are a part of any minority community, then as far as I'm concerned, June is an opportunity to make that known and to, share stories, lived experiences in a safe way, of course. It has to be a safe way because we know what this place can be like. But let's use June not just for LGBTQIA people, even though that will be the theme. Let's use it for everybody because, it's a spectrum of people. And if the spectrum was wide enough, everybody would be included, and that's the whole point. So, yeah, if a number of people email me and say, what's your thoughts on this? I'm not what is being, these are hateful terms that are largely used by the extreme right wing. They are things like rainbow warrior or gay mafia. And, when I hear LGBTQIA people using phrases like that, it does depress me, I'll be honest. But let's understand where that comes from. You see, the far right, want to split up the LGBTQIA community into singular things. Like you have that atrocious organisation, the LGB Alliance. They don't like the T. So they want to separate the T, and then they want to separate the I, and then they want to say, well, what's the point of having Q for questioning without understanding the history of it, or, well, misunderstanding asexuality, which, most people would think, okay, the definition probably usually means people aren't, don't feel sexual desire or a need for intimacy in that way, but that is not true. In fact, asexuality is quite the spectrum. I'm not asexual, but I would love to hear more from people that are, because there are misunderstandings there, I think, and it can be a bit confusing. But I'd like to see people who represent different parts of society speaking about their experiences. And like I say, excluding people is never a good idea. When you're on a rally, if you're on a march, the protesters are the ones that you need to send the message to. The ones that are standing there, cheering you and, putting real value to you, like we all matter. Well, they're already there. It's looking at the ones that aren't, looking at the horrible messages they're trying to put forward and protesting peacefully, being better than them. And that's the thing. It's not about who can shout the loudest. It's about who can communicate the message best. Who can cite the evidence, who can be good community champions, and that needs to be put forward, because currently we've got a generation of really good young people who have had inclusive messages, feel more able to be themselves in places like school. I'm thinking of teenagers in particular, and perhaps maybe they've not had the same experiences of people that are in their 40s or 50s, where discrimination was rife, where many were attacked for being LGBTQIA. I was kicked to the floor, and the person that came to my aid was a very beefy straight guy that just didn't like what he saw. I thought that was good. That was very good, because I don't know what would have happened if it wasn't. But of course, for the mainstay, it's going to be insults, slurs, which you've probably heard in abundance in this place. And it's about mindful language and just saying, hang on a minute, what does it matter to you? What two people, consenting adults, do in their private life, of what business is it to do with anyone else? I certainly don't make it my business to make inquiries as to what other people do. Not interested. We know biology. We know that sexuality is part psychological, part physiological. It's not difficult to understand. Certainly not for me. But there are inclusive messages. So if you are so inclined, if you are an ally of people, of human beings, and you value inclusion, then consider making that known on June the 1st. It's not me. It is, let's be clear, it's my message. It's not a national message. It's not an LGBT Stonewall message or anything like that. It's just something I feel you know, could be a good thing. And whether that's, you know, writing on your community walls, you know, for a shared lived experience, doing a short podcast, doing a live, you know, you don't have to go over the top. Just make it clear that everybody matters and everybody has a right to exist peacefully, because at the end of the day, we're all human and we all matter.